Welcome to the 10,000 Things Zoom for December 22nd, 2018. I'm Robert Saltzman, author of The 10,000 Things, and my guest today is Bernard Guy. Bernard has chosen the subject matter for today's meeting, and I'll turn the microphone over to him shortly and allow him to introduce our topic. Just want to make a couple of announcements first. The 10,000 Things was published in February of 2017, and since then has gained a worldwide readership and reputation as a book worth reading. So I encourage you to have a look at that book. There are chapters free to read in the description for today's video. I also have a beautiful announcement regarding that book, and it is this. Many of you probably know Julian and Catherine Noyce. They are the founders of the Non-Duality Press, an important press which they kicked off in 2004. I was imagining that the 10,000 Things would be published by Non-Duality Press, but before I could get the manuscript ready to go, Julian and Catherine sold Non-Duality Press to a larger company. And so I decided to self-publish the book. However, the good news is that Julian and Catherine have now begun another enterprise called New Sarum Press. And my book is one of the first two to be published by them. It's available now and at a price much lower than the initial edition of the 10,000 Things. And also in a more compact form, kind of like a penguin paperback for people who like to carry the book around. I will put a link to New Sarum Press and to the 10,000 Things also in the description. And with that out of the way, let me ask Bernard Guy to speak on today's subject. Bernard.
Now, to me, it's a few basic things that I'd like to clarify about my own understanding and experience about that. First thing is they're not two separate fields for me. I said that it was the last meeting with psychology and spirituality, that for me, the whole psychological side of ourselves and the whole being side or essential side are not. They're two different sides of the same coin for me. In the same way, for me, that freedom, talking about freedom from the personality or the ego and the realization of one's deeper nature, they're not two separate things. They're really one. You're looking at the same thing from 2 points of view. That's why we actually find, though we can say that many approaches really fall more on one side or the other, often we will find that those who start more from the point of view of talking about being free from the personality, they also have elements of talking about the reality of being, what it's made of and what it is. And conversely, those who talk more from that direction will talk also about freedom from the personality. In fact, you can hardly, in my own experience and understanding, you can hardly have, waking up, some awakening to the nature of being without a degree of freedom from the personality. If you're totally identified with the stream of thought, for example, well, that's that, and your life is totally conditioned by that, and you're seeing yourself and the whole of reality that surrounds you through the filter of those thoughts, because you totally believe that that's all there is. There's only that. You're totally identified with it. So an awakening to the reality of being implies a degree of freedom. Conversely, a degree of freedom from the personality, which we could call an awakening in its own way too, also implies the presence of being to a certain degree. Because the personality within itself can hardly wake up. There's another element that comes in there for awakening to happen. people said that, gave that example that somebody is asleep. Well, if you're sleeping in the night and you're dreaming, you can hardly wake yourself up. Some element will come from the outside, you know, the alarm clock will ring or somebody will come in and shake you awake, and suddenly you're awake. So they're not two separate things. That's one thing. Another thing that I had to clarify, or we talk a bit in the comment on Facebook with Robert, is for me, freedom from the personality doesn't mean that suddenly there's no personality anymore, there's no ego anymore. That's not what it means. It's like it's summarized in saying freedom from the personality, but really it's more freedom from identification with it, or another way to say it would be freedom for, okay, I'm the personality, but I'm not only that. So it's freedom from seeing that how my personality or my ego is perceiving myself and reality is not the only point of view possible. I think that would be the most accurate, in fact. There are billions of people on this planet that live reality from the point of view of the ego self. For them, this is reality. So I cannot deny that reality shows up as human beings through which it sees itself through the conditioning of psychological conditioning and all that. So that's reality too for me. But the catch is they think it's the only way that they can perceive themselves in reality. And to me, it's clear that it's not the only way you can perceive yourself in reality. So to me, when we speak about freedom from the personality, we're not talking that it will be gone. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, well, like I just said, that it's not the only possibility, what it's telling us, whatever it thinks about reality. So there's definitely a degree of a lesser identification. We could say also that it's, I remember I was about to use the word belief. Somebody once said, I don't believe in believing. Well, you know, we know that the ego self has 1,001 belief about itself and reality. So it would be about not believing all those beliefs. So it's about not going along, you know, so readily with everything that the ego has to say, that our personality has to say about ourselves in reality. And I'll finish that part by saying, you know, bringing back what I brought up, and I expounded it for those of us who read it in the announcement about the meeting. I expounded a bit, but what was my experience, what it means freedom from the personality or the ego self. And that explains a lot where, you know, and to me, Robert is somebody that comes like more from that side. You know, if you talk from that place of freedom from the personality, it's something that is so simple. I mean, it's so simple. Somebody once said, it's not that it's simple to understand. It is so simple, there is nothing to understand. But then, of course, if you know, you didn't wake up to that simplicity, it's just only words. And yet there's a value in saying those words, because who knows, you know, maybe somebody can say it in some way at the right moment for someone and something clicks in. So I was saying in the announcement, you know, that whether it goes noticed or unnoticed, we all know that any moment that we're just being there, we're relaxed, we're not preoccupied by anything, we're not worrying about anything. Whatever it is we're doing, we're just being there. Well, it's right there. In that moment, you're free. Obviously, because you're in a carefree state, you're not wondering about anything, you're not wanting to achieve anything, there's no special desire about anything. You don't want your state to be any different than what it is. You know, that's a big feature of it too. I think I wrote about that. I finished in the announcement with the little text by saying you're not using how the mind is defining you. as a description of what you actually are. You're not using that. You're not looking at yourself in reality through that filter that the mind says, because the mind always has a position, right? The mind is always saying something. It's a thing. There's something. I either want something to happen, to come, or I want something that I like that is happening to stay, or there's something that is happening that I don't like, so I'm rejecting it. I want it to go away. I want to change it. So I go into psychotherapy, and I go into spirituality because I'm not happy with my state and I want my state to change and all that. Well, in those moments where that is not happening, that you're just being there, like I said also in that little text, that the children, when we were children are in it, most of the time, up to a certain age, they are in that free space. They're not concerned about the past. They're not concerned about the future. There's no worry. There's no wondering anything. They're just being in the moment, totally absorbed in what they are, totally awake to what is happening, totally absorbed in it, to enjoying it, whatever it is, living it fully. So, yeah. And then, of course, it's, it brings up the question, well, how come we're missing it? We're not noticing it. Well, to me, that brings us in part to the other side of the coin, the side of the being part. I was looking at it in the last days,
Bernard, we're having some kind of freeze here. Don't think it's on my end, but it might be. I wonder if anyone else is getting that.
That and, identified with that, where there's not much space for else to happen. Or if somebody didn't develop one way or another, the capacity to be absorbed in one experience, whatever it is, well, then again, it's like there's scatteredness rather than the capacity to really be into something fully. So I could talk more about that, but that brings back that what I said at the beginning, that for me, they're not two separate things. We're looking at the same thing from two sides. And yet, and I said that also in that little text of the announcement, they're really two different sides. They're really the same thing, but they're really two very different, very different worlds. The world of freedom from the personality or being totally identified, then your reality is only what your ego self is saying about yourself in reality. Well, I just see that I could go on and on, but Robert and I, we came to the conclusion that we don't want to make that intro too long. So I'm going to stop right there. I think I already said enough. Maybe just finish by what I was just about to say in a nutshell. They're two very different universes of the same universe, because freedom from the personality is something just very, very, very ordinary and very simple. And even saying that is too much, too difficult, because saying simple implies it's a contrast to difficult. So it implies some difficulty, though the least of it. So it's back to what I said before, it's so, like somebody said, it's so simple, there is nothing to understand. It's the ordinary state, like many people said. It's just pure freedom. It's really, it's an amazing thing, this ordinary thing. And it just happens one day, and you just suddenly realize that reality is just free to allow everything that is to be as it is. And it has no interest in anything to be different. And the other side of the coin, the nature of being, well, that's a very rich, multi-dimensional, and this is like, so it would, you know, I'll finish by saying, because it comes to my mind, an image like freedom from the personality is like the atomic level of things, you know. Very simple, the basic level, very simple. Everything is made of atoms, and it's very simple. Now, how this atomic level starts to manifest itself as the 10,000 things, well, this is very rich and multidimensional, complex, not complex in a negative sense, you know, complex in the sense of, wow, the complexity of it, the richness. And to me, in my own experience, you know, 40 years down the road, the world of our being, it's really, I find, a treasure without end, secrets without end. Yet it's an open secret, like Rumi would say. Open because here it is. But it's really, I was saying, I'll really finish with that, and Robert, you could answer something to that. I was recently, the image came, I was sharing privately with someone and saying, it's like a treasure chest, you know, and then it opens up, and then there's all those, you know, jewels and stuff, and you pick, wow, you know, pick one up, then suddenly you pick a new one, and then suddenly, whoa, you're taking through a wormhole, and you're taking in a totally different universe. It's like, whoa, you know, what is this? But that was just part of what's in the treasure chest, and then you just keep going. And we've said it again and again, you know, I find it inexhaustible. I don't find an end to it. Maybe there is, who knows, you know, I don't know. But so far, it doesn't look like it. And looking outside at reality doesn't look like it either. Billions and billions of things. I mean, the creativity at work here is just like mind-blowing. So, yeah. So on the one hand, we have this utter simplicity. It's like it's nothing, you know. It literally is. As long as you think you're something, well, there you've got that. There you are, you know. But if you're nothing, you know, and you're free, and everything is free to be as it is. It's not your business. Everything is there, and it's everything, and there's nothing at the heart of it, because if it would be something at the heart of it, well, we would be all stuck with that one thing. You know, if truth was an apple, all there would be is the universal apple. But it's apple and oranges and strawberries and peaches and pears and bananas. So, voila. Robert.
Thank you, Bernard.
My pleasure.
Thank you. My internet connection went down for a couple of minutes during that, and I missed 2 or 3 minutes of your disquisition. So my only remark there is, yes, it's too simple to speak about, except all of us keep speaking about it. So there must be some fascination in the topic. I don't think I have anything to add. So at this point, I'm going to invite people who would like to ask questions or comment to join in.
We've got a lot of people today.
Yes, we've got about 30 people here.
Amazing. Welcome, everyone.
Before I throw the meeting open to all participants, I would just like to ask that you not tell extended personal anecdotes, because that's not what this space is for. Although there's meaning in all of that, I'm quite sure. And all of us have stories to tell that are fascinating. I spent 20 years of my life listening to stories like that. So, but please don't do that today. Instead, if you have a comment, if you want to speak personally, that's fine, but keep it short. Or perhaps you have a question for Bernard or for me.
So if I click, it says lower hand. If I click on it again, it says raise hand.
Okay, let me stop you for a minute, Martina. I think we're going to have to ask you to turn off your video again, because you just don't have the bandwidth. There you go.
Yeah, I'm just seeing that. Well, I just want to say I really missed last time, the last meeting. I did watch it and appreciated it very much. I wish I had been there. A lot of things I could have said about it. I wanted was clarity and bringing those two really, and I appreciate because that's you see that what reaction to be done is to observe consciousness in order to see why.
Martina, excuse me. Let me stop you again here. I'm hearing this tapping sound.
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from.
I have to ask you to stop, Martina, because it's not coming through.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Mute you and see if it goes away. Yeah, that seems to be an artifact of your situation there. I wish you had a better internet connection, because I think you just complimented me on my clarity, and I would have preferred to hear that in its fullness. But I didn't get to, which is probably good. Well, personality is a fact. It's not something that can be denied, and it certainly can't be killed or put out of existence any more than we all have different faces and different bodies. That's just the way it is. And one of my main critiques of this marketplace spirituality is this desire to just kind of legislate the ego out entirely, as if it's some disease, and would be inoculated against going on an ego trip or whatever. And from my point of view, the whole thing is an ego trip. Of course it is. You're alive and you care about that. And if you don't, then you're just like one of these holy men that gets carried around and fed or something, which I suppose is okay. I haven't tried it, and I don't intend to until life imposes that upon me, and I need someone to feed me and wipe my ass or whatever. That can happen. And then you won't have any ego problem at all. Not at all. So life is its own renunciation, I say, and I came to that conclusion years ago, that all I had to do was live with an open heart and not worry about figuring any of this stuff out. So let me now invite anyone else who would like to ask questions or make statements. Please do. Try the hand raise thing.
Looks like Monica has her hand raised.
Okay, well, what do you have to tell us, Monica?
First, thanks both of you for being here. And I have not, it's not really a question and it's not really a comment exactly. Maybe it's a combination. It's to both of you. When Bernard, you were talking about the things that need to be in place, like a certain openness of mind or what have you, or a connection to being for awakening to happen. I think you talked about something like that, like circumstances or whereby awakening spontaneously happens. Is that right?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what I said. Let's take it very simply. Like I think I said, if you have someone who's totally identified with his mind, and he has a very confused mind, and he's totally identified with his emotions, and his emotion is like this jumble of emotions and all that, and he's really totally identified with that, well, then, all the space is taken. Take it simply, then what else can happen? So right. That's why for me we can talk. That's the interface for me where weaves in the psychological side and the spiritual side. So I mentioned, one obvious one would be a degree of awakeness. We know that sometimes we come across some people, and they're just, you can even you can see it in their eyes, in their whole body language, in their energy. They're so asleep. You know, they're just so totally asleep. It's like you need a degree of awakeness, you know. We say awakening, well, call it awareness, call it consciousness, awakeness. You know, there's need to be a degree of presence for you to notice the freedom that is, let's say, to talk about freedom. You know, if you're not sufficiently present, so that would be one. I mean, we could go more into that, but I don't know.
Well, I don't need you to really, it's not a question exactly. Here's really what I wanted to say is that I agree with you there. I guess for myself, I don't know if that's across the board, but there seems to be also spontaneous flashes of insight or freedom, you know, personally, where you have that experience that you're talking about, opening the treasure chest or experiencing that there is no separate self. All of that, personally, that happens to me like it's happened in flashes, and it lasts for a week or it lasts for 2 weeks. And then this somehow, I guess this is to Robert, it seems to me that the nervous system or the psyche has to somehow integrate that for here, it wasn't enough to have this big flash of what you guys are talking about to happen.
Can I answer something there?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, for me, we need to be, you know, that's the theme of the meeting, was that there's freedom from the personality. This has nothing to do with any experience. It doesn't matter what your state you're in, whether you're in an ego state or whether you're having the most, you know, the most mind-blowing spiritual experience, which to me are real things too. It doesn't matter. So we really need to be very clear about what we're talking about here. That freedom we're talking about has nothing to do with the content of your experience. You're free in the sense that it doesn't matter what the content of your experience is.
Yes, no, I understand
If it matters, then we're talking more about the other side of the coin, which is experiences of being. That can be mind-blowing. I remember when I was, you know, in my early 20s, I had my first like major event, which was, you know, experiencing boundless states of being in a boundless way. I mean, in fact, the very first time it happened, I couldn't take it. It would take years before it happened again, where I could relax in it. First time it happened, it started to happen, and after a few seconds, I totally freaked out, because it looked from my point of view that if that keeps going on, I'm done for. Because I was having what they would call in the old times, you know, expansion of consciousness. One moment I was here, and then suddenly, second by second, I was bigger and bigger. When I got about 30, 40 feet, I was sitting on a park bench in Vancouver in Stanley Park, eyes closed. I opened my eyes and I grabbed the bench I was sitting on. It's like, because for me, it felt like if that keeps going on, I'm done for, you know?
Yes, that's been my experience as well.
Yes, so those are more, to me, experiences of being. And then we can talk about the fact that, yes, you know, it takes the time it takes for integration and maturation and the nervous system and all that. But that is a dimension in itself. The other dimension, which is freedom, it has nothing to do with the content of your experience.
Right.
You're free no matter what. And this is just amazing. In a way, it's more amazing than the most amazing, boundless, godly, divine experience you can have, which is amazing too. Because you're free then. There's a bunch of people who are enlightened and they're not free. Somebody once said, talking from the point of view of freedom, whether you're completely depressed, right, from an ego point of view, or whether you're in a boundless state all the time, one thing that it has in common, those two states, is you're not free. You cannot be in any other state. That freedom is such that, like, I feel like that now. One moment I might be in an expanded state of being. And an hour later, I might be confined to an experience where it feels like duality again with my little ego self. So what?
That's it. That's it. Let's underline the last thing you just said.
Yeah, so what?
A solid. That's very solid. Very, very solid.
Yeah,
You can be the most enlightened human on earth and be completely unfree. Completely. If you are attached to
right.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clear on that. So Monica, you were referring to the idea of preconditions for awakening. Is that? Did I hear that?
Well, that's more of a question, I guess, because on the other hand, it seems like that moments of freedom where everything is seen inevitably the way it is perfect, and that's the way it is, and it's not possible to change anything, nor do you want to change anything. That also, to me, feels very spontaneous. So I don't know. Answer is I don't know personally if that's happens because of conditions, or I don't know why.
Well, that's a very deep question, very deep, very, very deep, because it goes to the question of who or what is acting and choosing, or if there is any choice, etc. So I mean, there's no reason that I know to separate out spiritual practice and give it this elevated importance. It's just another thing that people do, like fucking and eating and taking a shit. I mean, it's no different. It's a human activity. And to glorify it is where the mistake comes in. That seems to have captured the universe of seekers, from my point of view. I'm just trying to wean people off of that one. As to the precondition, and you know, there's this bullshit around it, because, you know, some famous current Buddhist teacher will say, yes, practice doesn't awaken you. Awakening happens by accident, but practice makes you accident prone, and then gets a big grin on his face as if that's some profound understanding. Well, it isn't. It's just an advertisement. For me, it's very, very simple and very clear. Suppose you go to the old folks' home, and there's a few of these old women who are past 100, 103, 105. They are there, and they're sitting in the wheelchair, and they're alive and cogent, clear. And you go to one of these women and you say, how does it happen that you live to be 105 like this? And she may say, well, I went to yoga every day beginning at 18, and I only ate organic food all my life, and I never touched a drop of alcohol. Okay, great. Now you go over to the next woman, and she's just as clear. And you ask her, how did you survive to 105? What was your regime, your regimen? And she says, well, I started off the day with steak and eggs for breakfast, and in the afternoon took a real stiff shot of Johnny Walker Red. Now, this is the truth. I'm not making this shit up. This is what would happen if you went into the old folks' home. And all I'm saying is, if you look at me and then you look at Bernard and you say, well, hey, these two guys seem awake. What's going on here? And then you question us. Yes, we can tell you our personal history. I can say I did such and such and I did such and such. But it's just like the steak and eggs or the organic food and yoga. It's no explanation. That's historical. You're looking backwards in the rear view mirror. But as to what someone ought to or should do in this moment, I have no advice on that at all. How could I? It's your moment. I don't know what you have to do. And,
Well,
oh, yes, I've said it. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I mostly got from your book, which was so helpful. Is well, anyway, this is what happened. My interpretation, or what I got from it, was that, you know, everybody is so different that there's no, you can't say what's the cause, because like the 100-year-old, you don't really know. It's just like, my experience is mine, and you can't replicate it, or nor should you. And that's, to me, was so beautiful when I finally, I don't know, grokked that from your book. I was like, oh my God, you know, it's just so beautiful, and no way to explain it or compare it or prescribe it or anything like that. And yes, it's freedom. I'm not actually talking about, you know, tripping out on meditation or whatever. I get that. But that's what I got from your book, that it's so beautiful. Just everyone being him or herself.
I'm so happy to hear that, Monica.
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed that. And that's what Bernard was referring to. I'm going to take that little clip of his out. It's only like 30 seconds, but it got to the heart of the matter. And that is that freedom is when I don't need all of this. I don't need it. See, I'm free. Now I don't have to clutch to my identity and my knowledge and my development and my intellectuality and my personal history. That's just, nah. See, and we have this.
Yes.
We have this. So I have this moment and I participate fully. I don't have to be afraid. I may die in the next moment. My heart may stop. I'm not afraid. If it does, it does. I'm fine. That's it. That's freedom. You don't have to keep existing. You do not have to survive or keep existing into the future. If you go down that road, you'll either get on the health food kick, which is okay, but a bit overdone in my opinion. The yoga and health food is, it's fine if that's what you like. You will have a good looking butt, which is the kind of thing that I appreciate. So, I mentioned it. But, well, what happens here in Todos Santos, if I can be more specific, is halfway between here and town, which is a walk I often take, is a yoga studio. And most of the time, there isn't anything most of the year, there isn't anything going on there. But suddenly, just at this time of year, the snowbirds arrive from the north. And as I take my walk to town, I see all these lithe young women walking around in their spandex. And it's really amazing. I mean, it's like a flock of birds or something. Well, so that said, you can tell where my aesthetics lie. What I'm getting at here is clinging is the problem. I'm not the first to say this, far from it, but I see people clinging to spirituality, and I see them in the hypnotic trance, just deeply hypnotized by spirituality. And if you go to one of these retreats with a famous person I'm thinking of, soon you will be invited to take place in a guided meditation. Guided meditation. This is the stock and trade of these people. Well, okay, you're down there and you're instructed to sit comfortably, put your feet flat on the floor, relax, close your eyes, and just allow whatever thoughts may enter your mind to be there for as long as they are. Now. And then he will start to speak. And that is a hypnotic induction. Whatever the contents of the instructions that are given is not the point. You are now hypnotized by whoever it is. I'm not mentioning names anymore. I won't do that anymore because I have now come to a certain prominence and I don't want to get into fights with these people. That's not my intention. They won't like hearing this, but I'm not calling anyone out. So it's this hypnotic trance that I am trying to point out, the trance of imagining that you can know things that cannot be known, like everything is pure consciousness. You really know that? How? How? So that's what the 10,000 Things book was aimed at, Monica, and I'm really glad that you picked that up. That's the idea. And I think the love in the situation is that seeing my own inadequacies and my own anxieties and having somehow dropped that. I didn't drop it, it dropped, it fell away. I'm just speaking from that point of view. And I think that's helpful, maybe, but there's no instructions in it. I can't tell you what to do or what not to do. And in my view, everyone's story about awakening is different. Bernard and I communicate really well on this level of awake and aware. It's like he was saying before, you might meet someone that's just dead and you kind of know it. Well, it's the opposite is true. When I hear Bernard speak, there's a higher octave there, see, that I don't hear a lot of people playing any notes in that octave. But because I'm also open to that octave, I can hear Bernard's music. But it's not my music. I have a whole different little symphony, you know, Robert Saltzman symphony. And that's the ego. And I say, don't let that go, embrace it, use it as long as you have it. All right, I've spoken. Any comments, Monica?
Yeah, I think that's really what I'm trying to get at. You're saying it so much better, that there's a certain octave of energy, if you like, or the way that you speak, or it can be body language, as Bernard said, that this octave is not accessible, as Bernard was saying, for someone who is completely identified. And you can see it right away, because we're, you know, definitely. So what I'm also appreciating is that this conversation is not really for everyone, because if you're going to talk to people who want to be hypnotized, they want to be hypnotized. They don't want to hear this. That's been my experience. It's not for everyone. I don't know why, but it seems to not be across the board. Everyone's not attracted to this octave of music.
Yeah, exactly. When I was practicing psychotherapy, I had numerous requests for hypnosis, and I turned everyone down. And if they said why, I would say, this situation is hypnotic enough. Because here I am in mental health, supposedly, and I'm the great man, and you're paying me a large fee to have me hear your story and contribute to it. Here, now I'm just giving it away. But in those days, it cost something. And so that's hypnotic enough, see? When you pay for something, you already value it before there's any real evaluation. And that's why I don't know if that's why, but I find myself wanting to just give this away, because what my intention is to dehypnotize myself and you. That's what we need to do. We need to wake up while we're here and dance ourselves awake like a whirling dervish. See, that's what they were doing. They whirled around and around and around until they got so dizzy that they were out of this world. And then they said, wow, all my anxieties went away. And see, that's the desire, I must say, in my view, in my experience, that underlies all of this striving. Whether the striving is to have a great sexual experience or a great spiritual experience, there's no difference. What you want is this moment of orgasm or transcendence spiritually that ends your anxiety. Ends your anxiety. And you don't need to seek that. It's not out there. The end of anxiety is in this moment, I'm saying. And it arises codependently. It originates codependently, as a Buddhist would say, with the understanding that you are dying. And you are not going to continue in heaven or Buddhalandia. That's not the story. And as soon as you really get that, if you can, you will be free. You have to really get it, though. It's not enough to say, oh, yeah, I know I'm going to die. Everyone else is, too. That won't do it. See, you have to really feel that.
Yes, I think that's...
You have to feel that you and everyone you love and everything that you care about is nothing. It's just dust in the wind.
That's right.
Okay, well, see, that's it. And most people don't want to do that. They want to go and have tell them about this state that I'm in, and you can attain it. And I'm selling the instructions.
Well, that's been my experience around spiritual teachers, and it causes a lot of anxiety. It causes anxiety, not makes it better for lots of people, especially young people. I've seen a young person commit suicide recently, I think, and not only probably because of that, but in large part of feeling more inadequate because of that. Guru or teacher has some great wisdom or great experience, and you lowly person do not have it, and it feeds the anxiety rather than alleviates it. So I appreciate your work really a lot. It's fantastic.
Monica, you've really touched me with the appreciation of the 10,000 Things book, and I hope that everyone will read it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Thanks, Bernard.
You're welcome.
Any comments, Bernard?
No, not really. All is well. I mean, I could speak some more about, it's very clear that it happens when and if it happens. And also very clear that you started with that it's a deep and complex question to try to ascertain, what makes it likely to happen or not happen. So I could talk more about some things, in the direction of some things I already said, about, factors that will not guarantee, I never said that. They will not guarantee that anything special, like suddenly waking up and seeing, wow, I'm free, will happen. And yet, like I said, one obvious one would be to be present, to be awake. If somebody is really, really not present, really not awake to his experience, really, fast asleep in many ways, energetically, emotionally, mentally, well, who knows? Maybe it could be the exception that confirms the rule, like they say, and it could happen. And yet, I said it, and we could go more into that, but I won't unless it comes back up again. I could bring up the Sufi, and the Sufi tradition. They would talk about that. Some people who got interested here, if you ever got interested into Sufism, there's one design that we often find among the Sufis is the octagon. When you look at all the designs, even in Islamic culture, the octagon is something that comes back, and it's a figure that has been associated with some school of Sufism. And one of the meaning of the octagon is that, I'll make a long story short, the Sufis, they talk about the lataif. Some say there's 5, some say there's 9, some say there's 7. What are the lataif? They are, it's a plural word, the singular word is latifa. They're actually aspects of being. So obvious ones are compassion, strength, peace. So they talk about the octagon, and what is the octagon is 7 of those aspects of being that taken together make something unified, which would be the eighth factor, which makes an octagon. And they talk about those 7 latifas, or the lataifs, as both how being manifests itself and as factors for the being to manifest itself. In the same way that I mentioned, I mentioned factors like being awake, a minimum, capacity of being absorbed, looking at kids, I brought that before, is a good way for us to recall some of the inherent qualities of human beings that are potential for us adults to discover anew that we had as children. They're really awake, they're really alive, they're joyful, they have a capacity of absorption, there's not too much mind yet. So another aspect could be something about spaciousness. We could say peace of mind also. There's enough peace in the sense of spaciousness. You know, if your mind is too densely cluttered, you're too identified with it because you're not awake enough, well, what else can happen? So we could talk about peace, could be also, you know, another factor. So for me, you know, there's a sense, we're again back to the interface between that freedom more likely to happen with the presence, a sufficient presence of being in some of its aspects. And conversely, you can only get a sufficient presence of being in some of its aspects if there's a degree of freedom. You know, if you're completely identified with your personality, that's it, that's all, well, there's really not much space for being to manifest. So there's really an interplay. It interfaces those two. So I'm just saying more of what I said before. So yeah, that's it. Good for now. Chris Scheib has his hand raised.
Thanks again, you and Robert, for hosting this. I appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to try and ask you guys this question. For me, there's kind of like two things going on. There's beginning to understand how we get hypnotized by things, by beliefs, by our wants, by our things we cling to. And there's sort of an intellectual understanding of that, how we do that. And like in Robert's book, a lot of what we want to grasp onto, he kind of bulldozed it. And I love that. Because you realize how much we want to grasp and hold on to things and how it causes us to suffer. Because there's so much impermanence. Everything is always changing and we can't hold on to anything. And I, for example, see old people every day. My mom lives in an old folks home, and every month or so, one of the people I know won't be there anymore. They die. So I'm getting a big dose of, you know, the terror of the situation and impermanence. And I see that in my own body and with people and things and trees and everything. And it's intellectual. I get that. But there's something else that you guys seem to be, you know, you talk about, where there's this freedom from the personality. And I don't expect the personality to ever go. I know it's part of me. It's what makes me human. But Robert one time talked about how the ridgepole was broken, that kind of held that up. Or talk about the personality kind of being in the back seat. And then there's something else there. And it seems that there's a real shift in identification. And you're no longer identified with just that small little personality. And I can see a huge freedom there. But the one thing that I don't hear you guys talking about a lot is what that new identification is. And it seems like it's the identification with your everything. And that each moment you are whatever is there. You're whatever is arising. And I guess that's something you guys are talking about too, right? That there's freedom from the personality, freedom to just be whatever is. But it seems like something must just click where all of a sudden you go, oh, wow, I'm not just this little thing, I'm everything. Where you no longer, you kind of like know for sure in the gut, it's a non-conceptual understanding that occurs. And it's nothing any ego can do. It's just sort of this natural thing that just sort of happens sometimes with some folks. Is that accurate?
And so let me comment on that. It's like this. You can't produce
Right.
something that isn't already here. You don't have that power. See, that's a power that people assume that we humans have. I want things to be such and such this way, so I'll work on it, and eventually I will do that. that may work in a limited field, like learning a language or learning how to use a camera. That's fine. That's ordinary. But psychologically, we do not have that stance outside our own psychology. And as soon as we understand that, we are free, because there's nothing else. There is no world. There's only Robert's world. I don't have the world. I have Robert's world. And that's all I have. And that's all I ever will have. There's no way to get out of this. This is the gateless barrier that is referenced very often in Middle Ages Buddhism. I put the little poem from Lamen Huaycai. I think it was 11th century. I put that poem up a few days ago on Facebook. When unimportant things don't stick in the mind, that's your best season, is what he was saying. See, that's the idea of freedom, not that you can attain this magical world where everything suddenly makes sense. It's not like that. The freedom is in being human. Somehow this other thing got created, as if there's some spiritual world that's not here now, and we can somehow, I don't know, you know, it's not LSD. It's not like that. One of these famous Indian gurus, I think it was Ram Dass, gave him like 50 hits of LSD, and you know, this monk, he went through his changes, but Ram Dass says, "What are you feeling?" He says, "Everything is just as always. Nothing ever changes," meaning that everything is always changing, but he doesn't care. He's just part of it. It's flowing. That's a state that you can't wish upon yourself. Now, I just wanted to put this question to you, Chris, as a kind of a working question. You spoke for quite a long time and were struggling to put certain thoughts into words. And struggling is the wrong word. You essayed at putting certain thoughts into words, and you did. Where did those words come from? That's a question. It's a koan, if you like. When I speak, where are these words coming from? Where are they produced? Where are they made? Where is it all mixed up? And is it like baking a cake? There's someone in there putting all the ingredients together and then a paragraph comes out? I don't know. And I think if we investigate on that level, that's if I forget who it was now. Jack Cornfield. Jack Cornfield. If Jack Cornfield was correct in his saying that spiritual practice makes you accident prone, if that's true, which I doubt, but if it's true, I'm offering this as a spiritual practice. It's a simple question. When I speak, where do the words come from? So if someone wants to practice that for a week and then get back to me on it, I'd be happy to hear from you. Bernard?
Yeah. Well, one thing that stayed for me, Chris, is, and I'm not, you said quite a few things, so I'm not quite clear what was it. Maybe you could clarify that. You were talking about, you know, that we might talk, you know, about the nature of this waking up, but what did you say? That we don't talk, there's something you said that we don't talk much about, which was what? The nature of that. Then you talk about, you know, identifying, so there's no more identification, let's say, with the usual ego activity, but then there's identifying with something else, and we don't talk much about the nature of what that something else is. Was that what you said?
What I was trying to say is there's part of these matters that are intellectual, the notion that we're all going to die, there's no way out of here, this is all there is, there's no other world, this is the only world there is, period, done, this is it. Then what you speak of and what I've heard and read is there's this freedom from personality where you're somehow something starts happens where there's this freedom from personality, from all the wants and desires of it. It's not that it's gone and you still use it and it's something that makes us human, but there's, I would say, it seems like people have an awakening to a sense of being much bigger than just the personality, where they're, you know, non-duality speaks of it. It's the one taste. It's where, you know, where's your boundary? Where do you end? Where do you begin? And it's like, well, I'm the tree out there. I'm also this body. I'm everything.
Okay.
Something that seems like it's part of it.
Yeah. Well, to me, that brings back something I responded to Monica, which is we're talking about two different dimensions here, as I see it. You know, the freedom of this waking up, from the point of view of freedom, it is not about having any experience in particular. Whether the content of your experience, which is how reality is showing up for you as you, is ego, or being the tree, or being the totality of the universe, you couldn't care less. Because if you care about your experience being this or that, you're not free. But if you really take a really good look, you can see that there has to be an element in the heart of everything that is happening that is free from whatever happens to happen in the happening of all that happens, whether it's duality, ego, or non-dual state. Because if it wasn't free, then we'd be stuck with whatever is there. Like, you know, somebody who's only knows duality and believes that it's the only reality, because he believes it's the only reality, well, so duality is the only reality he lives, because he's identified with that belief that this is all. Then non-duality comes, and one of the usefulness of non-duality is it addresses duality. It's interesting that conceptually, you can only think of non-duality in reference to duality, right? There wouldn't be the concept and the experience of non-duality if there wasn't duality. So it's a good response to the constraint of duality that you can realize a boundless state and realize, wow, you know, then not. You can little more breathing room. You can breathe a little more, you know, easier, a little more freer. But then, you know, we're back to grasping, you know, or Robert used another word, but it's all back to the same thing. We're back to, if you grasp that non-dual boundless state, then you're stuck with that. Then again, you're not free. What about imagine the degree of freedom? I mean, sure, from the constraint of the dual state of the ego self to a more expanded state where, like you said, you're the tree and you're the sky and all that, which can happen. You know, many boundless states can happen because actually, obviously, life is everywhere. So it's even a logical possibility, you know, even if it's not your experience, it's a logical possibility that I could tune in a certain way to the life that is animating me. And as obviously it's animating everything, where, you know, it makes sense that I could have an experience of suddenly, you know, feeling I'm also the tree and all that. But imagine the degree of freedom where it doesn't matter anymore. For me, this is true freedom. That's why I brought at some point, you know, that all those enlightened cats, you know, many of them, they're as prisoners. I mean, it's a better prison. It's a golden cage. It's, I mean, compared to the prison of the ego, wow, you're in a palace. But whether you're stuck in a cell downstairs or whether you're living in a golden palace, if you're jailed in, well, you know, in fact, you're in a better position if you're living in a lousy cell downstairs, because then you might be really interested to be free. You might be more asleep if you're in the golden enlightened cage, because then, wow, it's so beautiful, man. You know, I understand why a lot of people, you know, who've known something of what we call enlightenment, and whatever that means for them, they remain there. They're not interested in anything else, because compared, like I said, it's a duality there. It's a polarity, duality, non-duality. But what if reality is neither dual nor non-dual? In fact, to me, it's obvious that it's neither dual nor non-dual. Because it's free from concepts and the experience that goes with concept. So if I conceptualize reality as being dual, then I'm stuck in duality. If I conceptualize reality as being non-dual, I'm stuck in non-duality. I've been stuck in that one for a long time. But then at some point, you know, whatever we want to say, you know, call it grace, call it whatever, to wake up. You know, for me, it was not a once upon a time thing. You know. It would happen, and then I would get back in, you know, ordinary mixed state of dual, non-dual, and then again it would kick in for something like seeing something in the distance, and then again, and then I cannot even point out, because it was kind of gradual for me. I cannot point out a moment, but somehow in the last years, you know, some years, it just grew and grew, the obviousness. You know, so you're what I see, Chris, and I might be wrong, is I find that you're still referring to that freedom. If we want to talk about that freedom, you know, I bring back again that for me, there's two dimensions. There's the dimensions of freedom from everything. Freedom from everything. That's, you bring back an experience that for me is not about that. It's more about the nature of being. And you still are concerned with that, which is understandable. You know, obviously you must be suffering from a degree of suffering from what you feel is constrained by duality. So, wow, it sounds great, you know, that I could be everything and everywhere. Sounds very freeing, which it is, right? But that's that. Freedom is something else. Freedom is freedom. In fact, I'll be honest with you. You know, so you said about, you know, the identification then would be more about being everything. Well, you're in for a surprise and maybe a deception. It's that freedom is really, truly about being nothing. Tough luck. Nobody, nothing, no stability, no security, nowhere to perch, whether you perch in your small body in your small house, apartment, or whether you're perching in the whole cosmos, you're still perching somewhere. There's no ground here. That's why it's free. Because if there's any ground, you're stuck with that ground.
Oh, yeah. Bernard,
for me, it's been a process. It's been refining and refining.
You're speaking my language, Bernard. I like this tune. I like this tune.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, see, it actually, Chris, it comes down to being nothing.
Yeah, nobody.
And nobody, everyone wants, old, forgive me, Bernard, I've interrupted.
Okay.
Old Chicago blues tune. Everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. This is exactly the story. This is exactly the story. I have freedom because I have no persistence. Nothing persists. And that is a scary state for a lot of humans. And I think someone like Bernard or myself, we're human. It's not like some kind of inhuman ability to come to terms with this, but there is fear involved and pain and suffering. And unless one is at least willing to investigate those states, well, then this really isn't going to happen. I don't see how. So if there's a precondition, you have to have a curiosity. And, you know, what the fuck is this? How did I get here? You know, what is all this? See, is the basic question. What is all this? It's not so much personality. we are burdened with personality, yes, to an extent. I mean, it's like a, bag of rocks or something. So we're a package of very strange chemicals that don't mix that well, and there's familial abuse and bad learning, and it's a very heavy bag, let's put it that way. Cultural bag, not good, hard. But I have to bear that. I can't erase it. And this is what Bernard was talking about. See, you can't throw it away. There's nowhere to put it. There's not non-duality where it's all one, and there's not duality where there's the dump out there and I just take all my sorrows and throw it in there and it's gone. It's all here all the time. What I am saying is that freedom does not inhere in having the liberty to do anything I feel like doing at any time, in any place, under any circumstances. That's not freedom. The freedom that I'm talking about comes from seeing human limitation and understanding I am a human. Human limitation exists, ergo, I am subject to human limitation. Doesn't mean that I can't be intelligent and free in my way and all that, but I'm a human. I'm going to live and die like a human. I'm in the human realm. I wonder if you've ever seen one of those Buddhist tankas, and it's got some fearsome beast like this with this circle in the mouth, and the circle's divided into either 5 or 6, depending on which form of Buddhism, slices of pie. And each one is a world. One is the animal realm. And then there's the realm of hungry ghosts, the Asura realm. And then there's the human realm. And then there's the realm of the hungry gods. And then there's the realm of the gods. Now, the realm of the gods has no freedom at all. Everything is always perfect and nothing ever changes. They're just frozen and static. All the action is in the human realm. That's where you have the freedom to fall into the animality of it all, having a human body, or you can become so-called spiritual. But that spirituality is not the place of perfection. That's a frozen realm where there's no action at all. We are the fortunate ones, we the humans. We were born into the human realm. And in Buddhism, that's considered the highest form of birth. That's that's the one everyone waits for in this traditional Buddhism. People have been waiting lifetimes to take human birth. And now I have it. And see, that's the freedom, is to understand that, not to fix it or get better at it. There's no freedom in that. That's compulsion. The freedom is to understand that you have this gift. You've been given a gift. It may burn you up. I don't know what it will do. It's a difficult gift, but it's the only one you get. Like Christmas, you get this one package. You open it up. And some of us got real miserable ones. And we say that they're disadvantaged or unfavored or whatever. Who knows what it is? They were born with some horrible deformity or lack of ability, or born into a family that was so shambolic that the personality never formed properly at all, or whatever it is. So now I see someone like Bernard or myself. Yeah, we've both suffered. We both know it. But we're alive. We may be beat up and damaged, but we're really here, see? And that's all it is, Chris. There's a point of seeing that. You say, you try to divide the intellectual from really getting it, but I think you really get it. I do. I think you really get it. It's like Bernard was saying, it may come upon you for 5 minutes on a park bench. Great. 5 minutes is a lot better than no minutes. And that's what my teacher, my guru, I give him all the credit in the world now, Walter Chappelle, my advisor, my my friend, when I was in this quandary that you say you're in, but I think it's old news, really, when you say that. I think that you're talking about the past, not the present. But in any case, when I was in a quandary like that, Walter said to me, Robert, it's like this. Every time you remember yourself, as he called it, oh, I'm really here. Wow. Every time you do that, that's one point. And he said, maybe the points at first will be random and pretty far apart, but if you keep it up, there'll be more and more of them. Eventually, there'll be enough dots so that all you have to do is connect them up and you get the picture. So this is what it is. If you have a moment of awareness at all, who's that beautiful dame?
That's my lovely lady.
See, now I'm totally distracted. Well, so what I'm saying is you connect, you see, you have these dots. You already have a lot of them. I know you do, because we've conversed in print and here. So it's just getting the picture. And at a certain point, maybe you get the picture so clearly that the picture never actually fades out entirely anymore. And it's kind of always there. And then it gets more and more solid to where you're not even thinking about that picture. That's just ordinary life. It's not this great thing that you one day discover. That's what they sell you, because that you can sign up for that course. Yeah, but this is a dropping of something, not a gaining of anything. And that's what Bernard was referring to, and that's why I love doing these duets with Bernard, because he's got that bass note down there, and it's really a beautiful. See, he has this higher octave. That's what I was saying, and yet he really knows how costly all this is. And it's really part of this is whether you're willing to pay the price. Really. I can't be this great thing anymore. It's not that I'm connected to the whole universe and all that nonsense. It's okay. That's a story. But the fact is that I'm nothing. This thing called Robert passes in and out of existence 1,000,000 times faster than Robert Saltzman could possibly manage that. It's occurring. And I noticed this. I just noticed it. So again, I'm presenting you with this koan. I expect a proper answer a week from now. And if you don't have it, they sell books now that have the answers in the back to all the koans. This is true. Koans are in the front, and now it's got the answer in the back. If you know what the purpose of a koan, the purpose is to baffle you, not to have you give the right answer. So now I'm baffling you with this. When you speak, where do those words come from? All right, I've spoken. Thank you so much for the comments, Chris. You're bringing so much intelligence to this, really. I appreciate it.
What about a short pause?
As you wish.
Yeah, let's do a 5-minute.
S'il vous plaît.
S'il vous plaît. So 5-minute pause, everybody, for bathroom, having a drink, whatever.
Make it a double. I'm back. So I was thinking during the break of, I mentioned the koan as a form of spiritual practice. Well, this Wu Men Huai Kai, 12th century guy I mentioned, compiled 50 koans into a book called The Gateless Barrier, which I understand to be human limitation. See, spirituality keeps trying to tell you there's a gate, and here it is. Practice, gate opens. And what Human Waikai was discussing is what he called the great doubt, which is when You don't know if there's a gate in the gateless barrier or not. And you can't care. Because if you care, you're not here. This is not a question of taking ordinary human compassion and saying, I can't afford this, then I'm not here, and throwing it away. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. If compassion arises, okay. But you don't try to be compassionate. That's when you destroy yourself. I wonder if you see the difference. One is freedom. If compassion arises and I start to feel how wonderful that is, it's better than an orgasm in many ways. Well, and I'm filled with love. Well, I don't have to try to want that. It goes to the top of the preferences automatically. Not that Robert did that. Robert didn't produce any of that. That just arose. All I'm saying is that it's very addictive to be free. And once you become addicted to it, you're stuck being nothing. A lot of people like me in the past would speak about how foolish they were, naked and useless and downtrodden and poor. There's a lot of talk about poverty, but they didn't mean of the piggy bank. That's human limitation. That's what we have to see, I say. So I'm no spiritual teacher at all. I'm a confessor of human limitation as a psychologist. I understand that what I call the world is Robert's world, and he can't get out of it. There's no gate in this barrier that I know of, So having accepted that, I'm inside this barrier with all my friends and relations. And here we are, all in the same prison. We are the human prison of enculturation, war, destruction, starvation, slavery, animal abuse. I don't mean to preach, but that is what we carry. And so if you don't feel sad sometimes, you're not participating. And freedom is allowing that sadness to arise without feeling guilty. That's freedom. I can really feel all of it. Okay, I've gone on another rant. I don't know what's become of this mind of mine. It must be old age. I'm blathering here. You see, and that's what Bernard was talking about, Chris. I'm free to blather. If that's what comes up, that's what comes up. And if people laugh at me and say, God, this guy's an idiot. Well, okay, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Robert. I have a couple questions for Robert. One is something you just said. Use the phrase "stuck being nothing," and by that, do you mean you realize you can't make anything happen?
Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to say next. I don't know where that's coming from. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing it. I have this thing that I call I has limited abilities. The ability that it seems to have is noticing. It seems to be good at noticing, so I go with that. As far as making something happen, I'm not good at it. I'm a failure.
Okay, and the other thing I wanted to talk about is in the last Zoom meeting, we talked about the self becoming identified with the body, and I had two questions about that. One is, how does that happen? And the other is, how does that change when you wake up?
I'm not clear on what you're asking exactly, David.
Well, the one thing that struck me from last meeting was we talked about the self becoming identified with the body. And I think before that we were talking about the myself who automatically notices all this. That's the myself who automatically notices all this, but the myself at some point becomes identified with the body, is what we were talking about last time.
Yeah, well, I would prefer to look at it this way. There are many myselves, many, possibly countless or infinite myselves. We don't really know enough about the universe metaphysically to go into that. I don't. No one does. But suppose there are many selves, all associated with this being, and some of them are totally identified with the body, and others are rather unidentified with the body, and they're more like rather passionless observers of the flopping around like a dying fish of this personality. So there's all of that in us, and it's a question of to what does one have access? And I guess what I feel about all of this is we need to use our intelligence as best we can to have access to sanity, whatever that takes. We need to ground ourselves somehow. And I don't know what would do that for someone else. I don't. And that's why I keep avoiding this idea of being a spiritual teacher. I'm not. And I'm also getting, the latest one I'm getting is a lot of people saying this community of yours. And I can't deny exactly that my Facebook presence has become a kind of a good place to schmooze. I get that. And that's fine. I'm not against it. And I wrote a book, and it's a good book. I suggest reading it. But I don't have a community. It's not like that. We all desire a community. I get that. And I'm willing to have that with you all. But it's not my community. Not at all. It can't be. That's what I'm saying to you, Chris. There isn't that kind of Robert happening here anymore. And it can't fulfill that role, even if it wanted. It doesn't want to, but even if it wanted to, it doesn't have the right stuff. Yes. So that's a nothing. See, I'm a nothing burger. To write the book, take photographs, all that's great. I like the praise even, but it's not going anywhere. I'm not going to organize this into the next happening. See, this is what we're doing right now, here, right now. Right now, I'm looking at you over here, so you probably see my eyes going to the one side or another. I'll speak to myself. That's what we've got, Robert. This. You may like it, you may dislike it. Sometimes it's intensely painful, man. A few days ago, a friend of 25 years standing, Agustin Estrada, died. I went to see him. He had throat cancer. He was in bed with his little granddaughter patting him on the arm. He had oxygen in his nose. Seemed to be gasping. I went in and told him I loved him and touched him, but I wasn't sure whether he knew I was there or not. And I looked at the whole scene, the family for which he'd been the center all these years. The man, he was the patriarch, he was the guy. He was the brains. And I really love this guy. So I was moved and I went out behind the house and started to cry. And I couldn't go back in, so I just wandered off. And I heard a few minutes later that he died right after I left. And his daughter said, he was waiting for you to see him, Robert. Well, I don't know that. But I know that this is what we're dealing with. And you see, I'm just encouraging everyone to please don't imagine there's some escape from that. Because if you do, I say, you will never have this. Never. No matter how many books I write. unless you are willing to die while you're reading one, it's not going to happen. Oh, so let me give it to you, Bernard. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on Chris's question.
And David.
So sorry, I meant David's question. Sorry, David.
No problem.
I mean, the only thing that comes up about the story about the body image and all that. Can take a minute to talk a little about it. First thing is you say, well, there is the self, and then the self identifies. Well, first thing I would say is, first, there is no self. A baby is born, and, you know, anytime anybody has a chance, you know, watch carefully for an hour or so a baby of a month old. It's very obvious that there's nobody there. There is a body, you know, but you look in their eyes and there's just this open wonder, spacious wonder. There's no self yet. And that's one thing that psychology found out is by the time a self arises, coalesce, all the, you know, we talk about it a bit in the last Zoom, I think, you know, memory traces of events are stored right within the psyche. So images of what happened, 10 and 100 and then 1,000 and then 10,000. And at some point, you know, they coalesce into an overarching image of oneself, right? Now, so by the time the self becomes conscious that it is that self that becomes conscious that it is. So already the alienation is done from the basic ground of awareness, you know, of openness. Yeah. By the time the self realizes that, oh, here I am, well, it is already, you know, it is already there. It is already came into being. There's not a separate self that identifies with the body image. And really, the point of identification, important to understand with the story of the body image, is it has to do with concepts and reification of concepts. What is reified is an image of the body in the psyche. You know, it's not really the body itself. There's just this image that is stored in memory, and at some point. Now, the question of how does that happen? I mean, some psychologists, you know, that study ego development psychology, they have some theory about what happens. But then for us, the question becomes even trickier because we're talking more within the context of being, right? Or the open field of awareness. Then it's not just psychology anymore. We can say, so to say how it happened, I mean, the best explanation I heard so far is something like, you know, there is a beingness that is present there, and it's non-reflective, right? It's non-dual in the sense that it doesn't reflect on itself to say, I am here. It just is what is here, right? So it's non-dual in that sense, right? You follow that, right? It's just there. It's non-dual in the sense that it's not a subject-object relationship it has with itself. It's just there. Like you look in the eyes of a baby, obviously something is awake and present there. But there's nothing in the baby that could say, yes, I am here, awake and present, right? It's not there anymore. So it's non-dual in that sense. Then that non-dual presence, the experience it has of itself, which is non-conceptual yet, we said it, is so deep, you know, it's so intimate, it's so deep, it's so real, so that anything else, it kind of feels like there's a distance to it. Yeah? And we're just theorizing here, you know, and it comes from some theory from psychology. So it is so intimate, the experience of the beingness, that any other experience, like sensations of the body, which would be the basic first thing, you know, hungry, satisfied, you know, satiated, cold, warm, etc., sensations of the body, The identification, which is not a process, it's just because it is the presence, is so intimate, so deep, so matter of fact, that anything else feels like there's a distance to it, so it's dual. So already there is like a seed of duality there from the beingness, that is a continuity of being, which is non-conceptual, non-dual, with the experience that because it's so intimate, it feels like something else, though it's still non-consensual, but already there's a gap there. So I'll stop at that, because that would be like the seed that would make it possible. Then that thing from which there is a distance gets more and more memory traces and gets self-images and object images with the feeling connecting those two. This is the theory of the relation, object relation theory school, which is that how they happen, those memory traces, it's always an image of myself in relation to an image of an object of myself, which is like mom. And then I like her, I don't like her, it feels good, feels bad, and all this. So 10 of them, 100 of them, 10,000 of them, at some point, all those memory traces or all those units of object relations, they coalesce, they cohere into an image, a coherent image of myself. And of course, I'll finish that by saying that, which are a bit something that was coming up about Chris, you know, what we're bringing, which is, you know, if you've practiced, so to speak, if identification with the frame of mind of a fixed self is what you've been doing, you know, totally absorbed in that and intensely for a year, 10 year, 20 year, 30 year, 40 year, now, you know, it could be exception, but you cannot expect that it will go like this. Though it does go like this, but, you know, it's just normal. It's like if, you know, it's like they say, all that they die, they die hard, but they die. It's like if you've been practicing something for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, suddenly you hear that there's, you know, another way of seeing things, another way you could live things. Well, that goes against your 20, 30, 40 years, you know. So I don't know, David, if that helps in any way.
Yeah, just that's helpful. A follow-up question, Bernard. So you gave a good theory about how the baby starts to get a sense of myself separate from its mother or from the sky or whatever. And then when, like in your experience, when awakening happens, how does that experience, how does it feel different as far as what started with the baby starting to experience that?
Well, I would say that it depends what you mean by awakening. I've said many times in the past around the word enlightenment, that if you want to use words like this, you know, awakening, enlightenment, liberation, as far as I'm concerned, you need to be very specific what you mean by that. Because you listen to, you know, 12 different people or 100 different people talking about awakening or enlightenment, and if you listen carefully, they're not saying the same thing. So the first...
I was talking about what your experience was.
Yeah, I know, but, you know...
But that's, David, that's really a good point that Bernard just made. That's an essential, that is a most essential point if you're interested in these matters at all. I mean, if you want to talk about or read about it, it's really important to understand that enlightenment or awakening means one thing to one in one tradition and another thing entirely in another tradition. And they may not refer to the same basic experience, basic human experience. We don't, yes?
Yeah, so that's why I brought that first. Now, to keep going, coming back to myself, well, I could come back to how I started all this. Again, You know, what do we mean by awakening in the sense of freedom, or do we mean awakening in the sense of waking up to the nature, the deeper nature of reality than the physical surface perception? You know? But then, so you were asking more. So what I would say, the basis of my own experience, but still in reference to what we're talking about, which is the state of the baby, right? We were bringing that up. Well, I would say that that it's a very hands-on thing. One of the best answer is, never mind me what I say. The next time that you have a chance to be around a baby, you know, not older than, you know, a couple months old, if you can, you know, the mother allows it because it looks like you're a good guy enough, just take the baby and hang out for an hour, you know, with a baby like that, you know, and really tune in the state they are in. You know, it is so, the younger you take them, it's amazing, because I had the chance, you know, I have a daughter, but also, you know, at some point I became interested. So I got the point. When I would have a chance to hang out with a baby, I would hang out more with the baby than with the adult. You know, hey mom, if I can take care of the baby, you can take a break. She was happy, I was happy. When they're very young, even their eyes, never mind the eye itself, even their eye is still not focused. You can see that the eyes are just floating, you know, in the orbits. And it will take, I don't know, I didn't study that, you know, a couple of weeks or whatever, and then slowly the eye will start to gain focus and more focus and more. Even physically, the eye, you can see it. But even after a month or two, focus is there, you can see they're really looking around, shapes and colors. But it is so obvious that they have no idea what they're looking at. So they are in a pre-conceptual state, you know. Really, there is no baby looking at colors. For the baby, there's no baby, there's no looking, there's no at colors. Us from the outside, we say, oh, the baby is looking at colors. But from the baby's point of view, there is nobody, there is no looking, there are no colors. Does that mean that he's not experiencing something? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that there's no concept attached to it yet. And that we talk about in some of the Zoom, we talk about that more. There's a level before the cognitive awareness, let's say it that way. There's cognitive awareness and there's pure awareness. And for most of us, they're glued together. The moment we see something, right away the cognitive comes and says, that's a tree or that's a screen. But if we're really alert, it is possible for those two kind of awareness to start to detach. And then you start to realize, my God, there is a possibility of living every moment totally fresh from a place that I have no idea what it is, who I am. This is also part of the freedom we're talking about from as far as I'm concerned, from the personality. From the point of view of non-conceptual awareness, I have no idea who I am. I have no idea what is happening. I have no idea what it's looking at. The idea that I have, this is cognitive awareness, and it's useful. You know, then I can say David, I can say Robert, I can say I'm Bernard.
Would you say that that's a package of habits?
The cognitive one?
Yes. A package of habits.
Yeah. It's learning. It's you know, it's schooling. It teaches you how to water a plant. It's useful. It's practical. You know.
All of that. Because the way that one was raised, the books
yeah,
one just read.
Because from the point of view of non-conceptual pure awareness, it doesn't know how to water a plant. And yet, interestingly, the part of you that knows how to water a plant, the basic awareness will make you do it with the most efficient way, the most elegant way, the most efficient way. It will bring beauty, it will bring precision, it will bring elegance, because it has those qualities. You know, it's very awake, it's very present, it's very alive. But as far as how much water it needs, and because it's this kind of plant, well, this is cognitive awareness. So yeah, from the point of view of back to the baby, and my experience is, in any given moment, the content of my experience is exactly as it is. And it's fluid, it's changing.
And cannot be otherwise in that moment. Would you say that?
Right. Oh, definitely.
Okay. Foremost, that is where you and I truly connect.
Yeah.
You and I, whatever we may, wherever else we may go in regards to all this, we connect on that point. It cannot, there is no alternative. This is.
Yeah, and it's a basic truth about the freedom we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. You said
it's all happening by itself. Totally. It has always been happening by
there's
itself.
nowhere else to go is the point. You see that?
No, because there's nowhere
the other
else.
places to go is dreamland. That's the what I call the hypnotic trance. You can be in that, or you can be it all.
Yeah.
And
at the same time, we both know that it looks like, you know, this noticing, this understanding, you have to come to it by yourself, which means you cannot believe anybody. You cannot believe Robert. You cannot believe me, you know.
That's right, Bernard. That's the other place where we absolutely coincide.
Yeah, you take it to heart or you don't take it to heart. And even that, it's not in your hands, obviously.
Yeah.
So if you're lucky enough, you will take it to heart. And if you take it to heart, well, then, you know, something else might happen than the usual thing.
Yeah, I've had people in my life who were influenced by me for a time, and it seemed to help.
Yeah.
And then they just it became part of their experience, and they were on to the next thing. And that's I think we're just all in the same boat. If you can give someone a boost, go for it. You know, that's my feeling about it. But it's no big deal, really. We can't make it into a big deal. It ought not.
Yeah, and we're clear, both of us, that there's no way we can claim any ownership.
No, of course not.
It's just, you know,
yeah.
I'm just the messenger, like they say, and even not, and not even, you know, not even really, I'm nothing. My position is more and more clear. What freedom? I'm nothing. Don't, you know, my mind will still sometimes try to make something out of me, or people will, you know, or you did that, you did that. I think there's a time, I'm reminded of something you brought up, Chris. I think that there can be a time in somebody's journey where it's useful for that person to be reminded that he is that freedom, he is that, you know, there can be a time, because we're so convinced so negatively, we have so much negative belief about ourselves, especially unconsciously, that we're worth nothing, that we're, so it seems to me, I've lived it like that in my own journey, that there's something useful about coming across some people at some point in your life that will really validate, you know, in a sense, Robert, he was doing, when he was telling you, you've already got it, Chris. You know, he was by doing that unintentionally, it just came up spontaneously, you know, he was supporting the fact that you are that. Now, I say that, me, you know, in my words. So there's a time to say that. Like Robert would do it sometime about what I have to share, you know, that he would value it. And I can take it. You know, I don't create me. That wisdom is not mine. I cannot take any ownership. At the most I can say, I'm a vehicle for it, but is that even accurate? Even that is not accurate. That would be like if the guitar I'm playing is saying, well, I'm a vehicle for the music Bernard is playing. But no guitar will say that, because the guitar has nothing to say. If I'm not picking it up and playing it, it's dead. You know, so I'm really the life of the guitar. So even saying I'm a transmitter or a vehicle or a passage, or even that is too much duality to my taste now. I just find one the messenger, one the message, one the conduit, one the, who else is here? What else is here? You know, and then that leaves me free. You know, that leaves me free.
So, by the way, I hope I'm recording this okay. I'm getting some weird
connection on and out.
Yeah. But just lost the thread. I went into techie land. I can't get back there. So Bernard, you've still got the floor.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's enough. Are you happy, David?
Yeah, I really appreciate being able to talk to you and Robert about this stuff. Thank you. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I think what I would stress is that there's no choice about any of this.
Yeah.
We understand what we understand as we understand it. It can't be forced. There's no other force than the forces that are already at work. Those are the forces. It's senseless to imagine that there's this other force that you can pray to or something that will enter the scene magically and fix everything. That's not it. See, this is the human life we have here, not the realm of the gods, not the realm of the jealous gods. The jealous gods are even worse than the gods because they want the God state. They're jealous. They can't quite get there. And like they're the B-list in Hollywood or something. Socially. But see, this is not a question of striving to have some other force come in and regulate everything. That's not it. All it is that you see that you have no choice. And I think that is the thing that people resist. Not all this falderall about nobody wants to die or something. You won't die. You won't I didn't die. I mean, things change when understanding changes, but people are afraid that when someone says die, they mean your personality will die, but it doesn't die. It just takes its proper, not proper, it takes a more measured place in the realm of Robert Saltzman, let's say. I mean, I'm trying to get at your question. I have an ego, clearly, and it has its wants and likes and dislikes, and we'll try to get them in its way. But that I observe that more than participate in. I observe it the way I might observe my dog that I'm trying to train or something. Oh, it does that. When it's presented with this, oh, it always does that. Wow, good dog. And then you pat him a few times and you give him what he needs and he's happy. I think there's some biblical parable about this. Where how do you keep a lion and a lamb in the same corral? And the answer is you keep the lion well fed. So that's the attitude toward ego. If something makes you happy, go ahead and do it. I mean, we're not here to put on a hair shirt and become spiritual after all. This is animal life, human life. It's to be embraced, not avoided, in my view. Yes, but that doesn't mean. Oh, I'll leave it. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, there's something that came up that I'd like to share, a little something, which I find interesting. Yeah, it looks like it's really ingrained and it's really powerful and basic that the ego self wants a stability. It needs, we said it, Robert in his own way, me in my own way. It wants a ground, it wants something it can hold on to. It wants an identity. Basically, it's that. Mm-hmm. It wants an identity. It freaks out if it sees the identity going away or having no identity. Just the idea of it seems too far-fetched. And one thing suddenly that popped up, and I was listening to Robert, I don't know when, a little while ago, is there an interesting reason also for the terror, really. It's more than fear, It's like terror, which we can relate to, dying, not be, which is interesting, which is kind of an interface between spirituality and psychology, which is, we've mentioned how psychology discovered that by and by, all the internalized experiences stored in memory, they organize themselves into a coherent image of oneself. But there's an in-between place before the self is crystallized, let's call it like that, before it's crystallized, where one moment, the experience of a self, of being a self, will dominate one's experience, but the next moment, being will come and just wash it out, right? It will just take over. So it will erase it, like a bit like something like we're talking about water and the sense of self being a structure, water structuring itself like ice. It reminds me of one of the last Zoom. I brought that image, like ice, but then sometime being again comes strongly and the ice melts again, and we're back to the water, which is the water of being. So that happens again and again and again and again. So there's a whole period of time where the baby goes between an ego state and suddenly being comes and washes it out, which is something, you know, people who are not, whose ego structure is not too solidified and defended can experience even in adult life. Somebody is a singer or a great dancer, and suddenly in the middle of singing or dancing, wow, something bigger takes over and they just feel in the flow of things, you know, and being takes over. My point, the interesting point is that so there's this period of time where it's in between. The structure is more and more crystallized and identification is starting, but it's still fluid. Being still dominates, let's say. So regularly, the whole thing melts down and the baby is back to a state of being, which is just presence, to just awareness. But there comes a moment where the structure of the self is crystallized enough and the identification with it is established enough that when the being comes once again to melt it, now there's enough of the self to say, oh my God, help, I'm dying, I'm going away. So a moment comes where the structure is crystallized enough and the identification is strong enough that it is not just an experience of the melting of the structure, but it feels like I am going away, I am disappearing. So I don't remember whose teacher or in what book I read that a long time ago, but it stayed with me and it just came back up. That it felt meaningful, and in my experience, I could connect with that at some point also. That fact, you know, that part of the terror of being nobody or nothing can come in part from the fact that it brings up a memory of a time where being was taking me over, and I was by then so identified with myself that it felt like my disappearance. It felt like I'm dying. It felt like I'm going away. So there's retained in the memory that terror of being nothing. So yeah, I'll finish that by saying that everything points to the fact that in the structure of the self, at the very core of it, there's this nobodiness, there's this nothingness, there's this emptiness. And part of everything it's doing, whether spiritually or psychologically, is running constantly away from that truth, away from that fact. From that point of view, everything the ego self engages in, we're not talking about, you know, feeding, having food, or going to the toilet. At some point, if you watch yourself, you might flash that, you know, why is it running all the time? Why is it running all the time? It must be running away from something. Well, it is running away from something. It's as if it knows somehow, somewhere, and it's nothing, you know. And also we can bring it back to something Robert often brings, you know, that it's dying every moment and we will die next moment. We'll all die next moment. Mm-hmm. Soon enough, you know, that in 50 years or whatever, 100 years, nobody on this planet will be the same people. It will be people by totally other new people.
Right, exactly. And they'll be going through the same old Sturm und Drang that all of us are going through. That's the human career.
So we're running away from that. As death as an event in the future, but more intimately as death as something that is at the core of that ego self who thinks that it's something stable that will continue. And which is a lie, because really it's like an empty shell. It's like,
well, what I have found personally, although I don't necessarily think you have to find this to be free, but when I actually observe death, and when I observe my own aging and how much my body has changed in the last few years, and I understand that where this is headed, it puts the whole thing in perspective. And then the many deaths that one must go through as a full-fledged human, a sane human, has to see many, many deaths all the time, ego deaths, deaths of what I hoped for and didn't happen, deaths, a little death when your girlfriend dumps you, whatever you want to call it. If we see what actual death is and accept that there's no escape from it to some better place, then we see that this present is the opportunity. This is when you aren't dying in that way. And you can experience the ups and downs of the human existence. And there's nothing to appeal to get out of it. I remember when Christopher Hitchens, I really like Christopher Hitchens. He died also of throat cancer, like my friend Augustine. He was an atheist icon. So he was asked if he had ever, at least once in his life, prayed. He thought about it for a moment. He thought, yeah, in a hotel room in Chicago, I prayed for an erection. And I thought, this is just perfect, because it's not really irreverent. It's actually quite reverent. What he's saying is, I'm not in control of that. See that? He had accepted human limitation, is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm referring to. The freedom that I experience is not the freedom to be in some magical enlightened state at all. I don't look at it that way. I have no idea what that is or would be. The freedom that I feel is the freedom to allow, or to not even allow, to observe all this happening with equanimity and joy. In the Sat Chit Ananda, the Ananda part is joy. And the Sat is awareness. The Chit Chit is consciousness. Sat is, I'm not sure right now.
More existence, I think.
Yes, thank you, Bernard. That's it. Sat is existence. So existence, consciousness, bliss is that formulation. And there's some truth to it. But what Bernard was saying earlier in the meeting, which I thought profoundly valuable, if you need to be in that state, you're not free. If you need to be blissful, you really have a serious problem on your hands. That's a pretty hard one to sustain 24 hours, 360.
It's interesting, Robert, that there's another of those trinities, I would say, before Satchitanand. It's Om Tat Sat. So we have Om Tat Sat and we have Satchitanand. So Satchitanand starts where the other one ends. Now Om Tat Sat is even more interesting than Satchitanand, though we could say that the whole thing is Om Tat Sat Chitanand. Mm-hmm. Om Tat Sat for me would point to what we're talking about, which is, so it ends with Sat existence. Tat is suchness, which is, famous with the Zen people and all that. Suchness is even more like non-conceptual, because if you say existence, then you're bringing the concept of existence, then you're bringing the concept of non-existence, life and death and all that. But before that, there's just what is suchness. It is such. And then prior to that, there's what the Hindu call Om, which is the potential for everything. for that, for this, for sat, for non-sat, for nanan, for non-nanan, for, you know, consciousness, unconsciousness. Om is the logos, it's the verb, it's everything. Om is the basic vibration before that makes everything possible. So I love that a lot of people bring the Sat Chit Anand all the time, but not a lot of people bring the whole sentence, Om Tat Sat Chit Anand, because it's very interesting, you know, because with Om Tat Sat, you're not stuck with the Sat Chit Anand, you know, you will Om Tat, and you're not even stuck with the Tat, with the suchness, you're with the Om, which they say, you know, the Hindi, that it's really the real thing, which is just a vibration of the potential of everything being, suchness of everything. So from the potential to the suchness of everything, to the existence of everything, to the awareness of everything, to the joy of being aware of everything. Yeah, I just brought it in because of the Sat Chit Anand.
Yeah.
Hey, there's another one. There's another one that precedes it. Om Tat Sat.
Yeah, so yeah, my critique of spirituality, this part of it, is imagining that the more bliss one feels, the more spiritual one is, and the higher one is, and the closer to reality. And you may be higher, but you're not closer to reality because you imagine that there's better and worse reality, and you get to, you know, move around in it because you're so free. And that's not freedom. See, that's, and you can pray for that, but that'll just be like, you know, Christopher Hitchens. It won't be any different. It's beyond your control, I say. I think that I'm kind of an existentialist in this regard on these matters, in the sense that I just find myself here without any explanation.
Yeah, I like to say that I'm just a human being. That's enough for me.
Yeah, that's a full-time job, eh?
Well, yeah, exactly. And what is it? What is it exactly? Well, that's the billion-dollar question. Not what is enlightenment or what is this or what is that. What it is to be a true human being. That's an interesting question now. As direct and simple and immediate as that. Anybody else wants to come online? You brave souls. Don't be shy. It's even just to say hello. Looks like we have a shy bunch.
Or maybe a lot has been said.
Yeah, a lot has been said. Well,
I thought this was a great meeting, Bernard. Some of your replies were so straightforward. It's very beautiful. I'm sure I'm going to cut a couple of minutes of that out into one of these short form.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, the clips.
Sure of it. I heard a sustained burst in there that was just so right on. So that's great, man, because it's improv, you know, we know that.
There's something from Martin here. As the enhanced whether his experience of suffering had changed. The answer that was starts with Almas was mentioned above in this chat box. I recall his being asked, so Almas was asked, whether his experience of suffering had changed as he traveled his particular path. He answered that while he still experienced physical suffering, he no longer experienced psychological suffering. Then Martin asked, how does this statement strike you? Well, as far as I'm concerned, Martin, we could look at that from where we started, you know, the point of view. And you can look at anything in a sense from the point of view of personality or the point of view of essence or being, you know, which is what we did to begin with this meeting. We look at, you know, the story of waking up from the point of view of either waking up from identification or with ego self and freedom from that, or waking up in the sense of realizing the nature of this beingness, of this aliveness, of this awareness. So I would say, how does that statement strike me? I would say that from the point of view of waking up to the basic freedom, well, whether you're suffering physically or not, so what? So if you're suffering physically, you're suffering physically. If you happen not to suffer physically, you happen not to suffer physically. Things happen. Things come and go. Sometimes you suffer, sometimes you don't suffer. So this is called life, you know. So you're fine with it, you know. I suffer. I was telling Robert, we met a little before the meeting, that I took a bad fall on some stone steps 2 nights ago. I was putting the garbage out and I didn't see that there was a coat of ice. And I really took a bad fall. I mean, I could have cracked my head open and, or, you know, bust a hip or whatever. I came out of it just with, you know, some bruises and now still a little pain on the left side, couple places on the leg and one on the upper rib. But I was lucky. I really fell and there was stone. And I tried to grab the rail and it was covered in ice too. So I really went down a few bing, bang, bang, boom. Thank God, as it goes, you know, my body handled it with its own intelligence the best it could. So I came out of it without no major break, you know, or dying even. Why am I bringing that up? Yeah, so that happened. So in the last 2 days, I've been, you know, not sleeping well because pain here, pain there. Like now it's fine, but certain positions, if I go down to squat, suddenly I realize, wow, I really have a bruise on my upper leg, you know, it really hurts. I can hardly squat, but I trust it will all heal itself in due time. But the point is that,
so you were lucky, right, Bernard?
yeah, I was really, really lucky. Could have been much worse. I could have really literally cracked my head open. That would have been it.
Yeah.
So my point is, so there is suffering, physical suffering. So what's the big deal? Sometimes there's suffering, sometimes there's no suffering. Sometimes there's big suffering, there's big suffering. It might make me cry. I will cry. That freedom is so free because it's not freedom if it's not free from everything. It's free from no longer experience psychological suffering. So on the one hand, it could mean simply that, Martin. It could mean that he's at a place where the degree of freedom is such that he doesn't engage into a mental activity around the suffering, physical suffering that is there. If there's physical suffering, there's physical suffering. He doesn't need to engage into a mental activity that will make a story out of the physical suffering, blah, blah, blah. You know? So
It's
that's
not,
one.
it's the physical suffering is not a problem, one might say, right?
And if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. Finish.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a problem. It's there.
Yeah, I was saying that recently to someone. I was saying, you know, if you're suffering, you don't see it as a problem anymore. Is it still suffering? And the person really looked at me like, wow, good question, you know, because it is a good question. Can you still call it suffering if you have no problem at all with suffering? Is it still suffering? Well, good question, you know. In a sense, yes, suffering is still there because there is suffering. In another sense, no, there's no suffering because you have no problem with it. So can you call it suffering? Well, yes, but no, you know. So back to answer you, Martin, I would say there's 2 points of view. From the point of view of freedom from the self, to say it like that, as you said, no problem. If there's suffering, there's suffering. No suffering, no suffering, suffering. No, everything's fine. But it can also mean from the point of view of being, because it's also my understanding and experience, that the more being shows up, the more the aliveness shows up, the more there is awakeness, the more there is intelligence operating, the more there is everything that I would more call on the side of being is present, then the more it lessens the identification. The more being is present, as much aspect as possible, then the more there is, obviously, the less it is likely that the identification will happen with something in me that could make a problem out of suffering. So for me, it's both true from both sides. You know, the more there is this innate, basic, simple freedom that allow everything to be, then, you know, no psychological suffering. On the other hand, the more there is the presence of this aliveness, of this awakeness, of this beingness, of this joy, of this, and so on, so this compassion, and this, and on, many aspects to being, then the less there is identification with mental activity. It's there, but it's there like anything else. You know, you don't make a big deal out of it. You don't need to grab on it and say, this is me, you know. Then again, that's another reason why he answered. So Almas answered that while he still experienced physical suffering, he no longer experienced psychological suffering. So that's the dividing line, you know. Like I've been in pain to a degree in the last 2 days because of that fall on ice, but I haven't, did I experience, let me check, did I experience any psychological suffering in the last 2 days? No, I didn't. I mean, the worst time will be when I was like, go to bed. That would be the most painful. I would just notice and feel the pain. And then I would just, and I say I, but really it's the response of the being in its efficiency and intelligence and presence that would move the body to take a position where it's the least painful possible. So even with that, I didn't do a thing, you know. So yeah, I can say the same he said, you know, and I'm no Almas, I'm just me, you know. Not to say that he's better or I'm worse and all that, you know. I enjoy what's coming through him in the last, whatever, 20, 30 years. I find it pretty groovy, and that's just me. But yeah, I can say the same thing he says, and I know Robert can say the same thing he says, and anybody who's awake enough will say exactly the same thing. There's nothing mysterious about saying that. Psychological suffering is making a big deal out of suffering when it's just a simple, obvious, very obvious, hands-on reality of every human being that there is some discomfort, you know, suffering, call it what you want. That's life. So, am I going to reject the rose because it has thorns? No, I'm not. One sniff of that rose and who cares about the thorns of that rose, you know?
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure, Martin. I hope it helped to clarify something.
Thanks, Martin. Good to hear from you.
Yeah.
I see that Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, could be
Hey,
from me.
thank you. Hey, once again, before I forget, thank you both. Thank everyone who's here. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful. I've been able to talk about these matters. Hey, I've been thinking about something. Robert, you were talking about self-remembering, and when you talk about it, it reminds me of in the past one time you were, even in your book, I think you were saying, if you can read the letters on this page, I mean, that's it, that there's nothing beyond just being aware, kind of a knowing, just knowing. And it seemed to me that it's kind of like being is like presence, which is self-remembering. And it's just a simple thing that just happens without anything you can do about it. It just happens, and it's not me doing it. Does that make sense? Is that?
That's obvious.
Okay. Okay. And the thing that's so hard is there's a part of me that wants to just think, oh no, there's got to be something more. Because one reason is I have no other experience than just this really common everyday experience. I see things, I feel things, I smell things, and yet I hear about people who have all these, and I keep thinking, wow, I need to have one of these big expanded consciousness kinds of moments. But then you guys will talk about it, and Robert, you especially, you'll just kind of bring it down to no, it's just this. I mean, the self-remembering is just going, well, I'm here, I'm aware of it. I might sense anger arising.
Of course, Chris, because what I'm saying is this is the human condition.
Yeah.
And it's the only reason that we are not all in that condition, or at least many of us, what's keeping us from is a kind of hypnotic trance that that puts a wrong spin on it. It makes striving the goal. when actually the goal is not to attain, the goal is to be prior to attainment. And then whatever attainments occur, they will have occurred in the context of actual being, not some kind of flailing around. Like, we just have to become sane is what I'm saying. Remember yourself is what Walter Chappelle would say to me. He would say, just remember yourself. And then he would give me these little clues. Like he would say, you drive a lot. Every time you put the key into the car ignition, before you turn it, say, I am. I am. See, and these are old practices, but they have no magical power.
Right. I'm amazed, though, how much I want to hold that carrot out in front of me and chase after it. And
Well,
I hear
there's
about
no-
a new kind of carrot that I want to hold.
There's
And
no
it's already
continuity. There's no continuity, Chris, without that carrot. That ego activity is like a tension between what was and what will be. You know, it's like a tension arc. There's a whole school of psychology, I think it was Kohut, that he defined the self as a tension arc between drives and goals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's this drive, I think it was Kohut, I'm pretty sure, that he defined it. He had the model of the self, which is like a tension arc between drive and a goal, you know, and that keeps it going, keeps it going, keeps it going. I mean, one thing that's been coming up a couple of times in that meeting since you came up, Chris, is you know, you always say, oh, there must be more to it and all that. Well, maybe there is. You seem to conclude that there is, you know, being in contact with people like me or Robert or other people. Well, another answer to that is, well, really stop and have a look. You know, did you really stop and notice that, you know, Robert was just talking about that beingness that is prior to the ego activity of attaining something, you know? Really stop and see, you know? It's the most funniest thing in one sense and the most tragic thing in another sense, that 99.9999999% of everything that human beings wish for would be there for them if they would just stop looking for it.
Amen, brother.
But they don't do it. The one thing that would do it, they don't do that. They hear that because we're all saying that. Even all the non-dual modern cats, they all say that too. Since times immemorial, there's been non-dual cats saying that.
Yeah, we humans are a funny kind of monkey, eh?
Yeah, then we're back to this ego activity. And what is it running away from? What is it preserving? Well, obviously, it's preserving itself. It wants to exist. It's scared shitless of not existing. But then we could inquire, if you're honest enough to really go and, well, I'm not really allowing myself to totally relax in what is simply because I'm scared, then you could keep the inquiry going. Well, what are you really scared of? What if you would just allow the fear to be there? Let's say you're terrified of stopping and say, well, I actually don't know what's going to happen. Recognize, which would be the intelligent thing to recognize, that actually you didn't do it, so you don't know what's going to happen. And just give it a try. See what happens. Maybe it's terrible. Maybe it's as terrifying as you think it is, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's the most lovely thing in the world, not to be anything, nobody. I think that every human being, every ego self has a deep place within itself that it just wish not to be. Maybe that's what Freud was picking on, you know, the thanatos thing, you know, the desire to die. He was picking up something real there. There's a place in us where we're just tired out of having tried and being the one that we think we've been managing life all the time, 24 hours a day, year in, year out. There's a deep place in every human being where we just wish we wouldn't be.
Yeah, we see this reenacted with heroin injection.
Yeah, true.
Just that's a big part of and doing dangerous things with dangerous objects.
Even simpler than that, Robert. A lot of people really love going to sleep at night. And sometimes I met some people talking about that, and I could really see what they meant is what a relief to go to sleep at night because I don't have to deal with my whole life at least for 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
A way to a small dying before morning comes. What a relief.
Yeah. Well, I'm someone who used to indulge in those high-risk activities.
Yeah.
Kinds, like riding a motorcycle 120 miles an hour.
Yeah, I know. Doing those, yes, all kinds of things, crazy things.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a form of escapism. It's a rather extreme one, too. You're kind of daring death to end it, you know, if that. So the question arises, how does one progress from that to a really joyful and heartfelt experience of living and dying? And that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think one honest answer I come to when I'm asked that is, which we're back to what is, and you're exactly where you are at. One thing I say to people is to whatever degree they can take that in and apply that, whatever it will mean to them is, well, wherever you're at, live as fully as you can. Wherever you're at, whatever you want, whatever you desire, live as totally, as fully as you possibly can.
Right.
Because it's only by living as fully that you will fail totally in what cannot be done. But if you live in a lukewarm way, you will never get to the point where what cannot be done, you will see that it can't be done because you failed 100%. You will remain lukewarm until you die. So whatever you want, wherever you're at, live as fully as possible. Go for it totally, because the more total you'll be, the sooner you will fail at what cannot be achieved and attained.
Well, you know, Bernard, that's my attitude directly. I mean, this may be the last Zoom. I have no idea, you know.
Yeah, sure.
So I just immerse myself in the beauty of this kind of carrying on and enjoy it while I can.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That seems too simple. I mean, see, it's too simple.
Yeah, like, you know, about those Zoom, at some point the thought came that I think it's the fourth one, and then it kind of felt, well, maybe we're coming to the end of it. And then I come to this Zoom, wow, there's never been so many people, and it's just beautiful. And here we are again, and it's just lovely.
I think that, you know, objectively, I think you and I are both presenting some very interesting information in a personal, at personal risk, let's say, of exposure.
Right.
I feel like when I first got started on this, it's now a year, by the way. My first Zoom was December 31st of 2017. So we're just about to finish. This is going to finish the year off.
Wow.
I felt so naked after, not the first time, first and second time, someone else was running the Zooms. I was just a guest. And it was a book club. I was an author, you know. So Douglas Harding book club. So but then when I started doing it on my own, I felt naked. A few times I felt so embarrassed.
Yeah, I felt like that at the beginning.
Because I realized, Jesus, you know, I'm just telling you. I mean, I've been speaking the truth to myself for years now. And I think that's really what I mean by sanity. It's when you don't keep lying to yourself. Mm-hmm. You might still want to, because shit's embarrassing and painful, but you just can't. Well, then you understand that you have to tell everyone else the truth too, if you really mean it.
We could say I would say that's another important factor, if we want to talk about that waking up happening to take place. You really need to be ruthless in the sense of really honest and sincere about yourself, what you're experiencing and what's happening with you. If you're lying to yourself, well, you're caught in a loop, in an unreal loop that can, if you stay there, it can keep you there until you die.
So this is beautiful, Bernard, because you and I concur here, absolutely. You have to be ruthless. You have to be a ruthless observer of your own tendencies. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance, really. It's true. You've got to see this. You've got to watch your craving and your desires and all of this. You have
Everything.
at risk of embarrassment, at risk of being unmasked. I really thank my time as a psychotherapist for helping me to go very deeply into myself, because of course all those therapy hours with clients were my own therapy also. Not that I was getting therapy from them, but I was having to therapize myself in order to enter fully into suffering that was being presented to me. I mean, the only way you can do that work is to remain aware of your own suffering. So you were mentioning, forgive the lozenge, I've got a bit of a sore throat. So you were mentioning Amos and suffering before, and how he had said he'd come to the end of psychological suffering. And I think that's true. I think that's true of you and me too.
Yeah.
I don't experience any psychological suffering. I really don't.
Yeah, and I could even, the freedom is appearing so more and more total that even if my ego self would grab the suffering and make a story out of it, so be it. I wouldn't have any problem with that either.
Exactly.
There's a freedom that is so free.
That's what's come. This was a good Zoom. That's what came out earlier in the Zoom. You even have the freedom to fuck up totally. And that's okay too.
If that's what's happening. That's what's happening.
That's right.
It's really free.
That's a freedom that's really free. You
Yeah.
can be a total fuck up and it's still okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And I want to underline also that we do not know the predicate of awakening. If there even is a predicate, there may not be one. It may just be that something happens in the total brain that just connects, and there's a chemical flood going on there, and you wake up. I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. I would not assume that there's some spiritual presence apart from my brain, no. There may be. I don't know that.
Yeah, my conclusion with that, Robert, is I could mention different experiences I had in the course of years that seem to point like that. A simple one would be one day I'm sitting in meditation and suddenly I'm at the other side of the room watching my buddy sitting with eyes closed meditating, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I'm intelligent enough or objective enough to recognize that whatever experience I have, even if, I had experiences of boundless consciousness, which some people would conclude that, therefore, all this consciousness and all is the ground of that manifesting everything. I could say that I had experience that I could conclude that, but I don't conclude that. Or I conclude that in part. I conclude more something like, well, from the point of view of what I experienced there, it looks like that. But I'm well aware that I'm having this experience right now being inside this human body. So who knows what is what?
Yeah, that's where I come down. I don't write it off. I'm not saying that there's no other levels of other orders of being that
right. But we're not concluding.
No, I don't conclude. No, not at all. I can't conclude. I cannot conclude. I can't
exactly.
Conclude.
This we have in common. That it's an open thing and open-ended, and any conclusion, if there's still something I catch myself doing every now and then, is somehow the ego self comes from the back door and it wants to conclude. And I did it many times in my life, coming to a certain place, and it felt like, wow, this is it, only the next day to be kicked in my butt. You know,
Yeah, exactly. So I found at first that, people were regarding me as a sage or something, and I at first bridled and was afraid to be framed that way.
Right.
But I'm actually not, because I can see that objectively. But all I'm saying is I reserve the right to tell you tomorrow I was totally wrong. That thing I told you 5 years ago that you've been practicing,
Right. Right.
And as long as I'll be willing to play sage for you, but you have to cut me that slack. I may be wrong.
Yeah.
And so anything I say, if it sounds good, great. Check it out for yourself, please. Subject it to the acid test. Don't take my word for it.
Right. The acid test. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it comes from Buddhism. It was saying, to test if something is gold. Well, somebody gives you a piece, just hammer on it and hammer on it and hammer on it. And if you keep hammering on it and it still remains gold, then great.
Well, the actual acid test was a bottle of nitric acid that jewelers would keep.
Right.
Shop, and if someone represented something as gold, they'd put a drop of this acid on it, and only gold would resist being oxidized.
Yeah.
And that's cool. I mean, we need to apply the acid test to things that others tell us.
Yeah, and the acid test, we talk about that many times in the past in other Zoom, is you have to make it yourself, August. You cannot believe me. You cannot believe anybody. At the most, you could say it's a working hypothesis. Go and see for yourself. Don't trust your own intelligence. Trust life's intelligence as you, in you as you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the Buddha said there is no self, anatta. Well, maybe things change. Maybe now there is a self. You know what I'm pointing at? It's like whatever anybody's self, well, that was first his experience. Then maybe that was true at his time, but maybe things change,
And
maybe there was a God. Maybe there was a God, in the time of Moses. But maybe now there is no God anymore.
And maybe the Buddha didn't really say that. And maybe the Buddha's been made into some kind of icon when it was just this cow who ran away from his privileged existence so he could find out what the fuck was happening on this planet.
Right.
And that's what he did. He just left home, went on a quest. It's a very old story. And by making a God out of these people, we deny ourselves the ability to experience our own version of that story.
Of course, Robert. We could make a Zoom just about that, idealization. From a psychological point of view, it's a profound issue in the ego, the need to idealize things, places, people.
Yeah, so I feel a sadness for the benightedness of the human race. I mean, this thing going on in American politics right now is so bizarre, I can't even stand thinking about it anymore.
It's getting bizarre by the day.
Oh my God. I have to laugh, but it's going to be bloody. It will take, this man is going to take many lives unintentionally.
It could.
Oh, it's already happening, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
He's given a couple of these dictators permission now. Oh, well, you can have Syria, go ahead.
Right. Okay, from that point of view, yeah. But even in the States, it could happen.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Anything can happen. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought politics into it.
Yeah, right. Leave Trump out of it.
Yeah.
Anybody else, last call. Anybody else wants to pop in and say hello or comment something, ask something? Because if not, we're going to come to an end.
Looks like we're coming to an end. Ed is here. Ed, do you not want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for this meeting and the wisdom here and also the energy here. I really enjoy it.
Where are you in the world, Ed?
I live in Sweden.
Ah.
Okay.
I was in Sweden once, many years ago. It's a cool place.
Was it in the cold winter or nice summer?
Same here ahead. I'm in Montreal. It's the winter. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed this.
Yeah.
I see Nishkala has just entered also.
Oh, really? At the last moment. Hey, Nishkala, we were just saying goodbye. Yeah, she came late also another time.
She's here though.
Yeah. Nishkala. Oh, yeah, there she is.
I didn't think you'd still be on even. I just
Yeah, well, we were just saying bye to everybody.
wow. Well, I will. Hello, everyone.
Hi there, Nishkala.
Hi, Robert.
We had a great meeting.
I bet you did.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Good.
A lot of people too today.
I had a meeting too at the time, so it just was hours actually. So
Right.
typing, but just so sweet to just connect now. Even.
Yeah, well, it looks like you were meant to come and say goodbye.
Just to see, hello and goodbye.
Hello, I must be going. Hello, I must be going. I came to say,
Stretch and move,
cannot stay. I must be going. That's the Marx Brothers.
Well, that looks like it, Mr. Saltzman.
Well, that was great, Bernard. Beautiful meeting. I was so happy with the things you said. Really well.
Yeah, it was a very beautiful one. So thank you, everybody. And I wish everybody that remains here a beautiful Christmas and holiday season. You take care of yourself and enjoy.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
Yeah, Chris.
Much appreciated.